Welcome to Perfectly Holistic. My name is Pam, and I am so excited and so honored to have the Dr. Chris Bessent with us today. She is an herbalist and a holistic veterinarian, and I am excited to welcome you back. I know we've chatted before in the past on different subjects, but the topic of IBD kept coming up over and over and over with clients. And as you and I were just discussing before on live, it's hard to find a cat without a GI issue in this day and time and all that. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insight today, because I think this is going to be invaluable to people whose cats are really struggling with IBD, IBS, just gastrointestinal issues in general. So where should we start?
Oh boy.
I know it's a big discussion.
It's so big, but yet it's also so simple.
Yes, yes.
Um, if, if you, it all comes down to food. It all comes down to diet.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the symptoms are so vague and common, and so many cats are affected that, as we said before, does the average person even know what a normal GI tract would be for a cat? So there's so many times that cats, they vomit and they have diarrhea and they have bad gas and they have some gurgly guts, but they're okay. They still run around and play. So it's such a spectrum. It's not like I'm sick or I'm healthy. It's this broad spectrum that gets progressively worse as they age, and it gets progressively worse because the chronic malnutrition continues. And that is, to me, that's the root of it. So I'm kind of giving away the whole show in the first 30 seconds. But the truth of the matter is, it's we feed cats wrong, period. And if they can tolerate it for a while, and I think what happens is it's this, kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, that for the most part, they can tolerate it. And then they get a little worse but slowly but surely it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, to the point that after a while, this chronic enteropathy, this chronic inflammation of the GI tract eventually goes on to the metastasis or to the development of lymphoma. So, the spectrum is huge, and the spectrum goes from just the cat who has diarrhea occasionally and has some foul smelling poop, all the way to the older cat that has lymphoma of the GI tract. And I would say that's all a continuum. It's all on that same spectrum of feeding a cat incorrectly. And goes back to so complicated, but yet so simple. And when you look at the veterinary research, there's just crazy amounts of research that are all describe in depth all of the lymphatic flow and the cells that are going here and the cells that are going there and the changes to test results, et cetera, that have been so heavily studied, which is amazing and fabulous.
Right.
But it's like, so everybody's so focused on each individual tree that nobody has picked their head up and looked at the forest.
Exactly.
And said, why do domesticated cats have so many chronic diseases? They have so many chronic diseases because we feed them bad. And when we feed them incorrectly, slowly but surely, that's going to take its toll.
I totally agree. And I want you to, if you can give our listeners and viewers just like maybe some highlights of some of the starting symptoms that we may not recognize, because we see our cats every day and we think an occasional hairball, oh, that's normal. Or what are like the normal signs that people miss until it becomes like, we have a problem.
Yeah, I think it's all the little things on and off soft stool.
Yep.
You think, well, that's no big deal. Then that progresses to more consistent diarrhea.
Mm-hmm.
It goes from just some foul smelling stool to now it's
like,
shut down the house.
Yeah.
It goes from occasionally vomiting to now more frequently vomiting, and it going occasionally vomiting with fluid and phlegm that looks like hairballs, all the way to now we're vomiting bile.
Yeah.
And now the vomit is not just clear, but it now has a yellow tint to it. And that yellow tint to it is almost always means that the liver is now involved.
Mm-hmm.
So and then of course they don't thrive, and that they just don't look good. And so it's something that as a cat owner, it's hard to put a finger on that and go to your vet and go, she doesn't look good. Her hair coat's not as good a quality. She just is not as lively and happy, because when all these enteropathies go on, the ability to assimilate all of the nutrients that they need can't happen, because now this very delicate kind of almost tissue paper like barrier between the food contents of the ingesta and the body is so inflamed that slowly but surely they have a harder and harder time being able to bring in all the nutrients that they need, especially things like B vitamins, those sorts of things. So it really is such a chronic, low-grade issue. But if you go back and you look, you could say that, by the time she was 1 year old, we started to see that she wasn't doing the best and having some GI upset, but not bad. 2 and 3 years of age, now we get some gurgly guts, and we get finicky eating, and then 6, 7 years of age, now we start to get elevation of the liver enzymes, or mild indications of a pancreatitis, which would just be like not feeling well and not eating as well. And then all the way to they're now 14, 15, 16, and could go on to lymphoma of the GI tract.
Yeah. And most people don't. Well, let me back up. People take their cat to the vet, and the vet will just go, oh, well, let's just use this prescription diet. He needs this special food, or, we just need some prednisolone. We need whatever to put a Band-Aid on the problem. When people aren't really getting help, they're just getting temporary solutions that may last a couple weeks or less, and then they're back on the hamster wheel, and they never figured out what the root problem is. And what I love about your approach is, as a holistic vet, you look at the big picture, you look at the forest, not the single tree, and you look for a root cause.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to the looking at each individual tree rather than the forest. And in this day and age of wonderful specialties, which is fabulous that we have that, then for example, I think kitties just in general are inflammatory. So if they're going to have an issue, it's going to be with inflammation. So like the pancreatitis that you'll see in kitties that have irritable bowel disease, it's more inflammatory. It's not infectious. If they're going to have a liver issue, it's not going to be a bacterial cascade into their liver. It tends to be more inflammatory. If they're going to have a cystitis, so inflammation in their bladder, it's not going to be necessarily from bacteria like it would be in a dog. It's more this inflammatory process. So part of what guides the way I think about things is Chinese medicine, as you well know, Pam. We've talked about it so many times. And in Chinese medicine, it would be this chasing of inflammation throughout the body. So is the inflammation in the GI tract? Is the inflammation in the bladder? Is the inflammation in the liver? Where is this inflammation? But I would say, looking at it again, the big forest, it's inflammation throughout. And what is causing that inflammation throughout in my opinion, it's diet and it's the nutritional abuse that we do to cats. That cats are true carnivores. I'm sure everybody listening would agree. They're true carnivores, but we don't feed them as true carnivores. We feed them as omnivores. So species that could eat grains and could eat carbohydrates and could assimilate those properly, but they really can't, because cats are just so uniquely different than dogs. Even though house pets, they're so different in the way that they respond to things, the way that they react to stuff metabolically and physiologically within their body. So cats, being these really inflammatory creatures, when you add a high carbohydrate diet and they do not adequately process glucose the way a human does or the way a dog does, and that develops higher glucose within their bloodstream, and that higher glucose within their bloodstream causes all sorts of havoc and inflammation throughout the body. So, whichever way you look, when you're looking at kitties with inflammation, it's, is it inflammation here? Is it inflammation there? And what is the root of it? The root of it is the diet.
Yeah, because the blood circulates throughout the whole body, not just to one organ. So it's like this little inflammatory train just circling around and throughout the whole system, spreading the love everywhere.
100%. Yeah. And as you had said before, that, straw that breaks the camel's back, that just, they can tolerate it for a while. That's the hard part about nutrition, is when they're young and vibrant. So their level of chi and energy is fabulous, like in a kitten. Kittens are amazing, right? They're beautiful. They have this great chi and they can tolerate so much. But then slowly but surely, this poor nutrition every day, this challenge to the pancreas every day, this challenge of inflammation throughout their body every day, slowly but surely takes its toll.
Yeah, and that's why it's hard to convince people who aren't seeing a problem feeding their cat dry food that they need to switch. They don't see what's going on the inside. They only see what's on the outside, and they're not. And I think a lot of times, we see our cats every day. We don't notice the little subtle differences. But when somebody new comes in and hasn't visited for a while, and they're like, "What's wrong with your cat? Its fur doesn't look very healthy." And you're like, "What do you mean?" Because we kind of go through with blinders on, because we see the same thing every day. We don't notice the little differences.
And I think it's fascinating that not only do pet owners not necessarily see that, but nor do veterinarians.
Right.
Nor do researchers, because research and science is really good at determining causes of acute conditions. So your dog gets into antifreeze, their kidneys fail, you can put A and B together. Like lick the antifreeze off the garage floor, developed kidney issues, boom. That we can put 2 and 2 together. But chronic disease is not something, especially something that like this, that's just a slow, gradual decrease. That over time you just kind of go, he's getting older, and chalk it up to just being older, not really putting 2 and 2 together. And by the time that most pet parents get to the end of the train, get to the end, and you're like, how did my cat get kidney failure? The dry food that you've been feeding their entire life. Why didn't somebody tell me? Why did I do that? Right? Because it's not until a symptom starts to bother us, or they get flat out sick, do you start to pay attention to it and make a change. And by that time, there's so much damage already done that you really need to do it prior. So we're talking about IBD, and IBD, by that time, irritable bowel disease is showing all the signs. So you've got diarrhea, you've got bad gas, you've got gurgly guts, on and off in impotence, so not eating as well as they should. All of those things can be seen, but you can still reverse that. So that's the beauty of chronic issues and chronic nutritional things is that once you identify it, now you can so easily change their diet and bring them back to normal again. So on the positive side, even though we're very like gloom and doom here.
No, but it's serious. People don't recognize it. Just because you can't see it on the outside doesn't mean that there's not something wrong on the inside, because by the time they become symptomatic, there's been a problem brewing for a while.
Yes.
You know, we just don't have the eyes to see through their little bodies to notice it, you know?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So the beauty is, as soon as you change them to a species appropriate diet. So cats they're carnivores, they need meat, they need organs, they need much higher percentages, very low carbohydrates, because they get the majority of their sugar from a process called gluconeogenesis, which is they get their sugar for their body from the amino acids from protein. So once they start doing that and you take away the carbohydrates and start feeding them the nutrition that they need, slowly but surely, the wheels of time kind of reverse. And all of a sudden they're more dynamic, they feel better. The GI tract is not as sensitive as it was before. The stool is not as horrible smelling as it was. And slowly but surely, it definitely comes back under control. So number one, species appropriate. They have to have high content of meat. And I'm sure everybody listening to this probably understands that and knows it. And moisture. I mean, cats would not normally eat dry things in the wild. They would eat birds and mice, and they would get all their moisture from their prey. And that moisture from their prey is like 62% of the moisture of that creature.
Yeah.
So that's where they would get all their moisture from. So when I personally see animals or cats that are drinking, to me, I think they're dehydrated, and I think they're sick. I think that they are chronically dehydrated. So species appropriate, but then also decreasing the carbohydrates, because they don't need that high carbohydrate content. They don't utilize it. It's super taxing on their system. The incidence of diabetes is crazy high in mature kitties. So usually 7 to 8 years of age, like an ungodly amount have pre-diabetic or diabetic signs. And that's crazy, because that's all from this high carbohydrate diet. So that is huge. But I would also say that the quality of the meats are also really important, because I'm sure you're going to have listeners that say, well, I've been feeding a higher meat content diet. My kitty still has some IBD issues. It depends on the quality of the meat. And I would say that's a whole topic that we're probably going to talk about more and more over the next 10 years, where right now, in order to label something as beef, it just has to have the DNA in it.
Correct.
The quality of that beef could be anything from a prime rib or a beautiful beef steak that a human would consume, all the way to 4D meat, which is meat that is dead, down, diseased, all the D's involved, but basically a sick animal that dies, and then that meat gets put into pet food. And then all the way to rendered meat. And rendered meat is something that for surely is not allowed into the human food production, but it can be bits and parts and all sorts of stuff that get blended together and cooked and then dehydrated, and they take out the fat, they take out everything they can, and then this dry powder at the end, that is the beef meal. So when you look at, when somebody says beef, what is it? Is it this beautiful sirloin, or is this rendered meat meal? And nobody has to disclose that. I mean, if it's a meat meal, they have to say meal at the end.
Yes.
The downfall is meal makes it sound yummy. Doesn't it?
I don't know. For those in the know, that doesn't sound yummy.
But if you're going out and having a chicken dinner, I want to have a chicken meal. Yummy.
No.
So the word should not be meal.
No.
And so I think that the quality of the protein that kitties eat is also super important.
Mm-hmm.
And so are those cats eating high quality meat, or on the spectrum, where are they? And as you go down lower and lower on the spectrum, the more you get what's called biogenic amines. And biogenic amines is like putrescin and cardaversin, and it's all these stable chemicals that happen when meat spoils.
Mm-hmm.
That is in the food or in the meat, and so that animal consumes it. So is part of this IBD the quality of the meat that they're consuming? And oftentimes people will say, well, now let's go to a novel protein. The kind of interesting part about the novel protein is usually novel proteins are things that are not heavily used in commercial pet food. So there's not meat meals for it.
Right.
You know, and usually the quality of the protein is good because there's not a lot of it. And so is there lower biogenic amines in those proteins? It may be. And I think that is like a whole nother component that we'll be talking about. The other is if you're feeding a high carbohydrate diet, are you adding glyphosate to their food? Mm-hmm. And glyphosate, which is the active ingredient of Roundup, is directly connected, and there's scientific research to show this, directly connected to leaky gut or permeability of this very tissue-like lining of the inside of the GI tract. Mm-hmm. So not only are we feeding cats carbohydrates that they can't properly digest or can't properly utilize the glucose from, is it also carrying with it glyphosate, which is really irritating and damaging to the inner lining of the GI tract as well. So a lot of questions about quality of the food that we're feeding need to be answered as well. I mean, right now, and here's, I kind of make a joke of it, but I shouldn't. But the bar for kitty nutrition is so low.
Yeah.
Like it is so low. If you couldn't nutritionally abuse them more because they would pass.
Correct.
It's just enough that cats stay alive.
Yeah.
But not thriving. And I'm sure so many of your people are feeding homemade food because they found that is the cleanest, healthiest way to do it.
Yes, or they use like a commercial balanced raw food.
Yeah.
With good sourcing, with appropriate ingredients. That it's to avoid some of those bad quality things that get thrown into other types of food and levels of food. What is your view on food sensitivity being like a cause? How prevalent is food sensitivity like a part of the issue of IBD and IBS issues?
That's a great question, because I would take it and say sensitive to what?
Yeah. I would say, some cats, obviously they're sensitive to all the starches and the carbs if they're eating a processed diet. Some cats that I work with tend to develop sensitivities to the common chicken, because it's in everything, or salmon or fish. The fish and the chicken seem to be very prevalent on the list of probable food stressor, protein stressors,
I would say there's no question that is the case, that in the broad view, absolutely, that it's sensitivity to all of these things. And then I would take it a little deeper and say, is it is it the quality of the chicken?
Yes. Like
But
what kind of chicken are we getting in? Yeah.
in the fish, is the fish have a high histamine count? And that is a huge issue in fish content, and is their sensitivity to that, not necessarily the fish itself, but to something within the fish. But there's no question in my mind that it is sensitivities, and is it what is the sensitivity to? And that's why I kind of go back to, it's all about ingredients. It's all about healthy, wholesome, clean diets. And you're right, there's some amazing companies out there that produce some really fabulous cat foods that are absolutely on the right track.
Including yours, by the way.
Thank you. We did that. We have the Simple Food Project, so for kitties, which is fabulous. But now we also launched Medicus veterinary diets, and we just launched it at the Holistic Veterinary Medical Association's meeting 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
So Medicus Veterinary Diets has 3 diets for kitties, one for chronic kidney failure, one for bladder and cystitis, and then another one for metabolic disorders. And to me, like I would take an IBD kitty and I would use the Medicus metabolic diet first, which is just super clean, wholesome meats and low carbohydrate and high omega-3 fatty acids and some antioxidants. And once they're doing well, then I would transfer them to something like Simple Food Project.
Yes.
Where it's more balanced, even though the Medicus metabolic is complete and balanced, but in complete and balanced, there's, such a range, right. You could be right just barely above it, or you could be moderate in its range.
Yeah. And something you said a while ago kind of rang home too, when you were talking about the quality of the food that they might be sensitive to. You have to think about these days, what did the food eat?
Yes. Yeah.
What kind of diet did that animal eat that was slaughtered and used in pet food? Where were they? How were they raised? How were they treated? What kind of diet did they have? Were they injected with hormones? Were they, eating glyphosate covered soybean crap, grains and corn and all of that? And if so, and that goes into our pet's food, then our pet is eating those indirectly. And that can also contribute to all these sensitivities, or I would think have a propensity to develop a problem because of the quality, like you said, of their sourcing and what was in the pet food.
Yeah. If you look at the nutrient content of the muscle meat from a feedlot cow, heavily stressed, high grain content, and you compare that to the nutrient content of a grass-fed cow, so one that's hanging out in a pasture, eating grass-fed, those cow, the omega-3 content in the grass-fed cow meat is so much better. It's almost as good as a fish or a salmon. So and then I asked the question about stress.
Yes.
That if the corn-fed cattle are heavily stressed, so they're all packed into a feedlot, and they're just high stress, what happens in a high stress? Your cortisol level goes up, and your natural protective mechanisms within your body go up, and now that goes into the meat. So when you're consuming that meat, you're also taking in those stress hormones as well. And you'll talk to, if you talk to hunters will say that all the time, that if that animal was injured and ran and was heavily stressed, the meat is not good quality to eat. Versus if they just kill them straight up.
I know. Poor animal.
Sorry about that.
No, but it's a reality. It's true, and I don't think we realize the damage that confined animal feeding operations really the animals and the non-quality of life that those animals have that go into the food chain is just horrendous.
Matters to us as well.
It matters. It matters. So let's transition to some of like your ideas and suggestions for how people can use specific foods, herbs, things like that to improve their cat's health condition, their IBD issues and GI stuff. Like, where would you start with someone?
Yeah, I would say that kind of twofold, that nutrition is absolutely number one. We've talked about that for quite some time now. So nutrition is absolute. Get on track with that. Then the other is the microbiome, and that you really need to nourish the microbiome. You need to add good bacteria to competitively inhibit bad bacteria. But then there's also fabulous Chinese herbs that you can use and Western herbs that you can use that can help bring down the inflammation of the GI tract. And by bringing down the inflammation, that means that they can start to assimilate the food better. So number one, change the forest. Then in that kind of concept of let's repair this, the way to repair the microbiome is, in my opinion, and I would say most people's, really good probiotics. Certainly the wider the range of species, the better, but there's not a lot of that commercially available. So adding a probiotic, adding a prebiotic, and a prebiotic is something that will make it all the way down into the GI, the lower part of the GI tract, and nourish the good bacteria. So rebuilding and replenishing the microbiome is about as huge as that concept of inflammation throughout a kitty's body. And that if the microbiome is good, the whole body is good. You know, there's a gut-brain connection. There's a kidney connection. There's everything on the external part of a kitty's body has a microbiome. So the mouth and the skin and certainly the gut. So replenishing their gut is huge. And then the herbs that I would use would be slippery elm is certainly fabulous. And slippery elm is a mucilage. So it's kind of like a mucus kind of on the inner part of the GI tract, which just kind of helps to enhance the barrier between the toxins and maybe chemical toxins or bad bacteria or whatever's inside the gut from being able to permeate into the bloodstream and then transfers throughout the bloodstream. And then the other one that I love is it's called, we produce it called GastroCare. And the Chinese formula for it is called Xiaoyao-san, and it's XIAO, new word, YAO, new word, SAN. And it's a combination of herbs that is really, really good to bring down heat and inflammation of the GI tract and of the liver. And the downfall with kitties is it's not terrible tasting, but it does have a herby taste. And so if you can get that into them, that's fabulous. If you can't get the pure powder in, then what you can do is steep it to a tea and then just add like a couple teaspoons of the tea to their food as well. Because with herbs, any amount that you get into them is better than not at all. So GastroCare would be the other one that I would use in kind of that idea. Let's get them over the hump. Let's bring down that inflammation. Let's get them back on track again. And certainly part of your GI program food-wise would be high omega-3 contents. And you want higher omega-3 contents to be able to nourish the gut as well.
And the omega-3s are really good sources of antioxidants, which bring down inflammation. So is there a particular like percentage over the traditional, normal, regular amount that a cat would use? Double it, for example, for omega-3s, or would that be too much? Or
I don't think I don't think that you can actually overdo omega-3s, except that it's higher fat content. But I would kind of in the same vein as making sure the quality of your meat is good, the quality of your omega-3s. So going with something like an algae or a krill or an anchovy or a smaller fish is a better choice than salmon, for example. The bigger the fish, the more they're going to accumulate toxins.
Yeah.
And toxins just generally tend to stay in the body in fat soluble sources, and omega-3 fatty acids, being fatty acids, are going to absorb more of those toxins. So either stay with like a fish or an algae that's really low on the food chain, or change it up all the time is always a great way to do it.
What about sardines? Like they could actually give them little anchovies, actual sardines.
Perfect.
Like 2 or 3 a day, or
Yep,
a week.
depending on the size and if they'll
Yeah.
eat them, and depending on the rest of their diet.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to make sure that when it's sardines in oil, is it actually the sardine oil?
Yes.
Or is it canola oil or some other?
I would say water.
Water-based would be.
Water-based.
And anything that you can do fresher is
Yeah.
absolutely better.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would say for kitties with IBD is there's the kitty, the triaditis. Have you heard of that? It's where the common bile duct, so going up to the liver, the pancreas, and the gut are all inflamed.
Oh, yeah.
And most of the time, if a cat has IBD, they have some amount of inflammation of the pancreas, some amount of inflammation of the liver. And so if you can lighten the load on the pancreas, so let's say for whatever reason that pet parent needs to feed that cat that dry, higher carbohydrate food, well then let's at least give them amylase or lipase. Let's give them digestive enzymes that can help to lighten the load on the pancreas itself.
Yep.
So that they can at least digest these nutrients that they can't physiologically fully digest on their own. And so adding like a lipase or an amylase, it would definitely help to lighten the load on the pancreas and help to bring down that inflammation as well.
Stephanie has a question, and she says, is there a particular algae omega-3 product that you would recommend? Doesn't Adored Beast have one called phytoplankton? There's a new product I thought I saw that's an algae oil. If you go look at Adored Beast, but I didn't know if you know of one.
I don't. We make Herbsmith makes a krill.
Yes.
Which is really fabulous.
And it's powder, which is great.
And kitties love it. I mean, it's really stinky and it's fabulous. Cats love it, and it's a great source. But yeah, getting an algae oil would be amazing. Mixing that in, have some sardines, have some anchovy. Just mixing it up all the time is always a great choice.
Yeah, I agree. So besides, so we've covered omegas, we've covered digestive enzymes, which I'm always a huge fan of. If a cat is having pancreas issues or food sensitivity, any kind of break we can give the pancreas, let it have a little rest, doesn't have to work as hard, help it out a little bit, give it some love is so important, And what about liver? Do we need to support the liver specifically for GI pets?
I would say in the cats, yes.
Okay.
Because for cats, there's that triad. So whenever there's inflammation of the GI tract, there's oftentimes, it looks like there
you go.
Not out there for a second. Anytime there's inflammation of the GI tract, there's oftentimes inflammation of the pancreas and the common bile duct, which then goes up to have inflammation of the liver as well. And of course, my go-to herb is milk thistle. And milk thistle is just, the silymerium in it is fabulous. And my choice is always the organic ground seed. So it's as close to real food as it can be, rather than using an extract.
Right. And I have to say, milk thistle is a rock star.
Yeah, it really is.
It has so many great benefits to that plant that just it makes the liver really, really happy. You know?
And the beauty of using the milk thistle is, if let's say it is the glyphosate in the carbohydrates that's
Mhm.
affecting kitties, there you go. The milk
It
thistle is going
helps.
to help to detoxify that. If it is some of the biogenic amines, can the milk thistle help detoxify those as well? I mean, again, we're going to know more in the future, but it really is kind of cutting edge, the amount of biogenic amines that are in that are considered fine to be in pet food. Yeah. And so milk thistle is always great, and it has a kind of nutty walnut taste, so kitties eat it great.
That's awesome.
And that's such a hard part. There's so many things that you can do, but will cats accept it? And that's
right.
You can say the same thing for diet. I'm sure there's wonderful people that are saying, I wish my cat would eat a raw food diet, but he hates it. He wants his carbohydrate laden kibble. And so you have to figure out a way to get that into them.
Yeah, absolutely. What about anything else for like the intestinal lining? Do you use a humic acid product or anything like that for GI?
I haven't personally.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great choice. I love the humic acid and fulvic acid as a way to detoxify, as a way to kind of keep it within the GI tract rather than having the glyphosate and other chemicals like that being absorbed into the body.
So healing that leaky gut and talk about leaky gut for a second, because the cats with IBD obviously have some element or level of a leaky gut issue.
100%. Absolutely. They have to. I mean, there's that's kind of part of the
condition,
kind of the end product of this whole degenerative process, that the villi, so the lining of the intestine, have these little villi that have little assimilating cells that absorb the nutrients. But as they become inflamed, they become shorter and shorter and shorter. And as they become shorter, the interlocking between the cells starts to loosen. And as that loosens, now you've got the inside of the GI tract allowing the passage of bacteria and all sorts of things, that toxins that shouldn't be moving from the inside of the GI tract into the bloodstream. So now you have this amazing battle with the immune system to try to contain that. And I think leaky gut is such a in-depth conversation that you could, but I would say that almost all IBD has some form of leaky gut, whether it's just in the small intestine or it's all the way down through the colon.
Right. Besides slippery elm, are there other bitter herbs that you like for helping to heal the intestinal lining? Or for the IBD, IBS kind of issues?
Yeah, not necessarily. Do you have ones that you guys you commonly use?
I've used like some blends, like some products that have a blend of different things, including the slippery elm. Fennel comes to mind, licorice comes to mind. Like some of the more bitter herbs that do so well in the GI tract, just to help reduce the inflammation and, kind of lubricate it all up.
Yeah. I stay away from them because it's so hard to get kitties to eat it.
It is. Yeah.
Even though they don't have the sweet type taste buds like a dog or a human, it's still bitter and they reject so much. The other is acupuncture, and acupuncture has been very helpful in my veterinary practice. So of 30 years, I used acupuncture routinely in kitties, and interestingly enough, they love acupuncture. They're like little endorphin junkies.
They are.
I thought the first time I did acupuncture in a cat, I was going like, we're gonna have acne. But interestingly, they love it. They get that great endorphin release, and they get super quiet and purring and happy, and acupuncture is really a great way. And they're also, you can talk to your acupuncturist. There's also great acupressure you can do as well. Mm-hmm. So something that your pet parent could do at home when they're having a flare up. Because as you know, with IBD, it's always going to be ups and downs. Mm-hmm. You know, there's going to be good days and bad days. And you're probably not ever going to be able to 100% determine why a good day is a good day and a bad day is a bad day. But the beauty is with acupuncture, or acupressure. So there's so many things that you could do as a cat owner that would help your kitty as well.
Yeah. And there's tons of resources online. If you guys are watching, just go look up acupressure chart for cat and, you know, IBD, just put a bunch of those terms in the search bar and you will find information, and you'll find the meridians, and you'll find the points, and it shows you how to, you know, gently massage those points. And it's very cool how that whole, I love Chinese medicine. Yeah. They really are brilliant because they tie in the whole energetics of the body to the physical body. You know, they combine it all together, which is fascinating.
What I love about Chinese medicine is it's kind of looking at the forest, not the trees.
Yes.
And it's very much big picture and this association to nature, but not so much into giving it an exact name. Where Western medicine is really great at diagnostics.
Yeah.
Really good at determining what exact pathophysiologic thing is going on. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure people that have tuned in that their cat has IBD, their veterinarian said, well, let's do a biopsy. Let's do an intestinal biopsy. Mm-hmm. And my first statement is, and what would I do different based upon that? Yeah. Would I do different food, or would I do? The only thing I would do different is if it had progressed all the way to lymphoma, you would be able to diagnose that versus just being a standard IBD. But Chinese medicine is not so good at the diagnostic part of it. Mm-hmm. It's excellent at, here's what we can do to change this energetic landscape.
Right, because it's all about the movement of qi.
Yep.
If there's stagnation, is there heat? Is there cold? You know, they're trying to get the energy to be even and flowing. And when there's an area of the body that is stagnant or damp or hot, you know, there's an imbalance. There's an imbalance in those organs, which affects the systems. It affects function. And so that's why I love their approach, because they're like, oh, we don't need to diagnose it. We just need to determine, where is it heat? Is it dampness? Is it stagnation? And how do we get it flowing? And then they go in and they find the things that need to make that flow, which is brilliant.
And all of those things are involved in IBD. Yeah. So if we were to, you know, everything we've talked about so far has really been like looking at it from the Western approach. Mm-hmm. When you look at it from the Eastern approach, it's damp heat of the colon and damp heat of the small intestine, and rebellious stomach qi, which is the vomiting, or oftentimes diarrhea is damp heat. So it's that the GI tract is not moving in the direction it should, it's reversing, or when we would call it an inflammation. So Western medicine would say we have an inflamed bowel. Chinese medicine would say you have damp heat in the bowel, which means that you have inflammation and you also have stagnation of the fluid. Mm-hmm. So if you were to look at it, it would look like a swollen. Damp heat is swollen. And that's where you get that really foul, stinky cat smell, or cat stool. Yep. That's damp heat of the colon. So the herbs that we would use and the needles that we would use for acupuncture would be about moving the qi, not too fast or too slow, as well as moving the inflammation and moving the dampness, which would be the fluid, throughout the body as well. So that's the really fun part, is that gastrocare, so the herbs that I was talking about, Xiaoyaosan, it's a Chinese formula, and it's a Chinese formula all about damp heat of the GI tract.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is so cool. And I can tell you from personal experience, who's used acupuncture for myself, you can see results in one session.
Yes. Yep.
It's such a great thing to pair with your herbs, with your diet. If you did a holistic approach to treatment, that would be something to add to your toolbox, because I think you're going to get there faster.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah. You know,
I will still say that the bottom line is diet.
yeah.
So diet is everything. And so you could use all the herbs, and you could use all the acupuncture. You could do all the right things. If you're still feeding them a contaminated diet, high in carbohydrates, you're trying to swim upstream.
Right.
So why not stop that? You know, and I would say the other part is, let's say you couldn't afford to do acupuncture and you couldn't afford to do herbs, but you could afford to buy healthy meats and organs from your neighborhood butcher. And you just did that. The innate intelligence of a cat's body will bring down the heat and bring down the inflammation and want to regulate itself back to being a healthy GI tract. That's the really cool part, is that, and we don't talk about it from a Western perspective. We don't talk about innate intelligence or this kind of homeostasis to try to get back to normal. But just feeding the right food is enough to kind of push it in that direction.
100%. There's a couple of questions over here. Stephanie said, is there a brand of slippery elm bark? Yes, it's called Herbsmith.
Yeah, Herbsmith, we do have one. And I think the most important is it needs to be organic.
Yes.
And ideally wildcraft harvested within the United States. Because there is a lot of slippery elm out there, and a lot of it is not good. And I literally have just purchased a bunch of it for Herbsmith, and it's not cheap, and it's not easy to find. So you really have to make sure that you have a high quality. And what you can do is you can always ask the manufacturer to see what's called the certificate of analysis. So when we bring in a herb into Herbsmith, we get a certificate of analysis with it, which tests for any bacteria, any heavy metals, pesticides, any herbicides, that it does have the USDA organic seal. If it has all of those things, then we'll bring it in and package it for a pet, and with the right directions. But there's a lot of bad slippery elm out there, so you do have to be careful.
And there's also the regulating, I don't want to say regulating body, it's a certification, NASC.
Yes. Yep.
So
we're A-rated, audited member of the NASC, and have been for, 16 years now, as long as we've been in business. So it is really important where you get it from.
Right. So you guys can look for the NASC label on any supplement product to see if they've gone through this third-party certification, which it was just another elevation of quality. Yep. Okay, so I'm looking through the questions here. She says, do you like small batch chicken? I personally love small batch chicken. Well, my cats like small batch chicken.
Yeah, I think that I can say that I have not done a deep dive into their product line, but what I have seen seems really fabulous. So I mean, it definitely is biologically appropriate.
Yeah.
So check step number one. And that in itself is going to get you in the right ballpark. Yeah. And then you can ask them questions about biogenic amines, or ask them questions about how do they source. You know, a big thing for me is if it says on the ingredient deck, meal, chicken meal, it's bad.
It's no.
And unfortunately, and I say this but I know it's really difficult. 95% of cat food has a meal in it. So if you're wanting to go good, Smalls is a great one. I'm sure they do not have meat meals in theirs.
Right. And small batch uses whole food ingredients like Herbsmith does instead of a premix vitamin pack for their supplements and stuff. So their raw stuff is awesome. Okay, so I think that's all the questions I had. I had some great comments. Oh, Stephanie says, yeah, a biopsy was what her vet said was the next step, but his appetite is great and he's not losing weight. He was diagnosed with lymphoma.
No.
Yeah, it's hard, but I would just say, don't give up because of a diagnosis. Treat the cat, not the numbers.
Right.
Change the diet, use the herbs, give his body time. Give the body the tools it needs to heal itself.
Right. High omega-3s, high antioxidants, and species appropriate diet, and he could go on and live a vibrant life. I mean, it's all about quality of life.
Mm-hmm. And then Early Riser says, is there a list of appropriate commercial raw diets that are better than others? I have my thoughts on that, but what are your thoughts?
I would say go to Truth About Pet Food.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah. Susan Thixton she's just a hero. She's just an unsung hero in the pet food industry. And we're on the list, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
She has a very detailed set of questions that you have to answer in detail. And then when she reviews those questions, then she comes back to you and says, I want to see a certificate of analysis. I want to see proof that this is actually what you're doing. So she doesn't just take the propaganda from the website or from a beautiful packaging. Mm-hmm. She gets right down into the nitty gritty and asks this really strong questions. And once you're certified with them, it's not like you just get recertified again. Every year you have to get recertified, and she evaluates. So applause to her, because she has, if you're on that list, you're doing a good job.
Yes. And she publishes that list every December, I believe. And for a donation, I think you can get a copy of that list. But yeah, she has vetted these companies and gone through their list of claims. Like you said, they have to back up what they say with documentation. So, she's done a lot of the hard work for you. But yeah,
you wouldn't be able to get, like, if you were going to try to do it yourself, they're not going to tell you, where when you're answering the questions to get onto this list, you're going to disclose a lot more stuff than you might have the time to disclose to the average everyday person. So she really digs deep.
Yeah.
I would put her in the same category as the NASC. Kind of, if you get the NASC seal, you're doing it right. Mm-hmm. If you get Susan Thixton's seal, you're doing it right.
Yes, Susan.
The problem is there's so much propaganda out there,
right?
And is it all just propaganda? And I mean, how did we get to this point? We got to this point because a bag of dry cat food that has the DNA of chicken could have this beautiful picture of a chicken breast on it. And that is not at all what is in that bag. Mm-mm. But it is allowed to be done, and the average person can't even imagine that is true.
It's so true. It's so true. Well, we are almost out of time, and I want to be respectful of your day. Do you have any final thoughts, anything else you want to share before we wrap it up here?
Yeah, my big thing is that you can always change it. The trajectory of your kitty's life, it can absolutely be changed with the right food, and do it today. It's super easy to do.
Yeah. Right.
If they're more stubborn and you need to add herbs in, or if you need to add acupuncture, or certainly probiotics, prebiotics, digestive enzymes are easily attainable. Mm-hmm. Microflora is a great one that we produce for kitties. But my encouraging words would be, it sounds terrible, but it's so easy for us to change it. As a pet parent, you're making their decisions. Just make decisions about their diet.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time and sharing your expertise. It's so much fun to just learn from you. I really appreciate you. You guys, thank you for tuning in and thank you for watching this. And please share this information. If you have friends that have cats with GI issues, even if it's not labeled IBD or whatever, please share this information because we really want to get the word out and help as many cats and just pets in general as we can. So diet is foundational. Good diet is foundational. A bad diet is foundational to bad health. As much as good diet is foundational to great health. So thank you once again. Have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.